Yeah, we can start now.
Okay, Vivek. Thank you. Good morning to the participants who have joined us today morning for this workshop on reverse engineering and malware analysis. As you all know, these workshops are held as a part of the Sanjay Radha Kshetram, the Indian Army annual cyber security hackathon. And this hackathon is organized by Military College of Telecommunication Engineering, Rashtriya Raksha University, and Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Information Sharing Analysis Center, or ISEC, is a non-profit cybersecurity organization having partnerships with government bodies for cybersecurity capacity building, and we also conduct many cybersecurity training courses in non-technical, technical, techno-managerial, and awareness levels. As you all know, the two challenges of this hackathon is over, and only the final one is now left. And today's session will be conducted by Mr. Vivek Parekh. He is an expert in reverse engineering, malware analysis, secure coding, and network exploitation. He is also a part of CyberRange and is a National Cybersecurity Database Certified reverse engineering expert. So over to you, Vivek, for the session.
So, yeah, let's start. So, this is about reverse engineering malware analysis. So, before we begin, first of all, you need to get a clear idea that if you are actually trying to find whether a machine has been infected, how would you go about it? Okay, so what you do is you observe some odd behaviors like too much memory being consumed or files being deleted. Files being deleted or randomly getting encrypted. Okay, so to even begin to understand what is happening to a system, we need to get a base first. Okay, so for that base, what you do is you prepare a VM, a virtual machine, and you prepare the necessary tools. You install the necessary tools, and then you perform a full-scale analysis of a malicious executable. Okay, so that's how you get started with reverse engineering and malware. Okay, so the goal here is to identify to what extent a file is malicious and how to use some common tools to perform your malware analysis. Okay, so reverse engineering is very helpful in that. So what it is, in general, it's an understanding of the inner workings of the system or deriving its blueprints from a functional sample. Okay, so reverse engineering is used in all sorts of fields like software, hardware, and even in aircraft industry it's used. Okay, so generally when we talk about software reverse, when we talk about malwares, we always use the term software reverse engineering because we try to find the inner workings of a malware. How do we do that? We employ some common tools, and using those tools comes under the field of software reverse engineering. Okay, so what's the common motivation for reverse engineering? So reverse engineering can be used in several fields. Okay, so it's used in malware analysis, vulnerability research, software protection, and program analysis. So in malware analysis, antivirus analysts, they generally use reverse engineering to find out a new strain of malware, okay, and develop some suitable counter protections for it. So counter protections in antivirus industry are signatures. Okay, so each antivirus, maybe you've seen a pop-up saying that okay, your definitions are out of date. So in that case, what happens is the latest definitions are not updated on the machine on which the antivirus is installed. So that's why antivirus gives you that pop-up. So once you update your antivirus, then you get updated with all the latest signatures that have been created by the either manually or by in an automated way by antivirus analysts. Also, it's used in field of IDS and IPS, so intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system. It's used in that field because people want to develop some network signatures or network scans. One common example is SNOT. Okay, so that's how you protect against malware in IDS and IPS field. In vulnerability research, uh, exploit development authors, what they do is when a software's source code is not available, they reverse engineering software. Okay? So while reverse engineering, what they do is they try to find out how how a vulnerability can be exploited. So it's used in that field. And vulnerability patch analysis, what happens is, let's say you have a patch from Microsoft. So what people usually do is they analyze that patch, they perform some reverse engineering on it, and they try to find out that what vulnerability was fixed by the patch. So it's used in that field. Reverse engineering is also used in software protection field because people want to stress test or do a strength analysis of their software. So they might want to find out to what extent their software can be reverse engineered. Okay, so software protection field also uses anti reverse engineering. So in anti reverse engineering, what happens is you develop suitable counter protections uh, so that people are not able to easily reverse engineer your source code. Let's say you have developed a very good game and you don't want people to develop cheats for it. So what you do is you employ some anti-reverse engineering techniques in your software so that people are not able to reverse it. So reverse engineering is also used in that. It's also used in program analysis field because let's say there's a new file format or there's a new protocol. Okay, so what you do is you trace the protocol or you reverse engineer the file format. Okay, so in that field also reverse engineering is used. Now, what's the basic approach to reverse engineering? You need to have a basic objective of what you are exactly reversing, like what software it is, or like how long the software has been, what's the age of the software, and then you identify the technology behind it, what programming language was used in making that software, what compiler was used. Okay, so you also perform dynamic and behavior analysis. So dynamic analysis, what happens is what you try to do is you try to run the. Am I audible?
Yes, Vivek, you are audible.
Yeah. So in dynamic and behavior analysis, what we do is we run the program, okay, and then we attach some tracing tools. Okay, so we attach some tools because we want to find out at runtime how the program is behaving. Let's say we want to modify, we want to analyze what registries are being used, okay, which registry entries are getting created, what network traffic is there, or what new processes are created by the malware. So we use dynamic and behavior analysis in that approach. So in static analysis, what we do is we do not run the binary, we do not run the malware, but instead we simply perform static analysis on it. That static analysis could be disassembly or decompilation, uh, just reading the reverse engineered source code of a binary. So we do static analysis in that field. Then finally comes the validation. So validation is all about confirming that whatever results you have obtained are correct or not. Now, validation could be done by a third party or could be done by you once you obtain the source code. Just a sec. Yeah, so that's what validation is. Now we come on to types of malware. So types of malware could be your viruses, or what the viruses do is they infect other programs. Exploit kits are generally used by advanced APT groups. Okay, advanced persistent threat. Those groups use exploit kits because they want to target some specific group or company. So they use exploit kits in that field. And then there are Trojans, which masquerade themselves as genuine programs, okay, but are indeed malicious. Then there are worms. What the worms do is they infect they usually transfer themselves from one network to another. So they propagate throughout the network, infecting systems. Then there are mobile malwares. Okay. There are also malicious documents. Now there are also IoT malwares. Okay, IoT malwares are like maybe the malware is on a smart device. Yes, even a smart device can get infected. Then there are ransomwares which encrypt your documents and demand a ransom in return. Very common types of malwares, these ransomwares. Then there are rootkits finally, which are stealth, ring zero, stealth kernel mode malwares. They do not reveal themselves easily and are very hard to detect. And also they are very not very common, these rootkits. So what's the malware initial infection vector? So we try to find out that how did the malware initially get on the system. Okay, so initial infection vector can be, let's say somebody found a malicious USB device in a parking lot, and out of curiosity, they just want to plug in that USB device and find out that what's inside it. Maybe they click on a file. They might get infected in that way. Then there are malicious JavaScript and HTML pages. So malicious JavaScript can infect any person visiting the HTML page. Maybe the HTML page got owned earlier, and then malicious JavaScript was inserted. Now, when a user with, let's say, a vulnerable browser tries to visit that HTML page, they might get infected. Then there could be an SQL injection attack. Okay, then there could be a malicious email attachments. So what happens in email attachments is some organizations, they are targeted by customized spear phishing attacks. So in spear phishing attacks, what happens is maybe the person who is sending the malicious attachment has an internal knowledge, or let's say he creates an email that appears to come from a known person. Okay, so in that case, people might think that, okay, this is coming from a genuine person. They click on the email attachment and they might get infected. So these types of customized attacks combined with malwares embedded in Office documents are very successful. Okay. Now, what's the traditional malware infection chain? So the point of entry of a malware could be from a malicious attachment. A file gets downloaded, or a file is transferred, or simply auto run. Okay. So in all these cases, what happens is a payload is returned to the disk. That payload, even when it is analyzed by an antivirus program, it might happen that that payload is not detected. So that way, a malware gets written on the system. So that's the point of entry of a malware. Now, how to set up the analysis environment? What you do is you download, install, and configure a Windows 10 virtual machine. You isolate the VM network, install common tools using Chocolatey, learn how to capture network traffic from a Windows 10 virtual machine. So it's all about having a free virtual machine. Now, you need to isolate the VM network. Why? Because you want to monitor the malicious traffic. You don't want the malicious traffic interfering with your usual day-to-day activities, your usual day-to-day traffic. You don't want that. So you isolate the VM network. Then you install common tools. Okay, so what common tools? Let's say you want to um, have some process analysis tools, or you want to set up some dynamic analysis tools, some static analysis tools like disassemblers. In dynamic analysis, you might install a debugger. So these common tools you need to install. Now, there's a very good package manager called Chocolatey, which can really reduce work on your end. So all you have to do is you simply need to type the tool name. So before typing the tool name, you just have to type the command choco install and the tool name. Okay, so that way that tool might get installed. Now This Chocolatey is very easy to install. It behaves similarly like the APD package manager on Ubuntu. Okay. Then you need to learn to how to capture traffic from Windows 10 virtual machine. So what you do is you install Wireshark. Okay, so Wireshark is a very popular software that captures network traffic. Okay, so that's how you set up your Renesas environment. Now we come on to portable executable and ELF formats. So why study them? Because these formats are essential for statically analyzing closed source binaries. So performing dynamic analysis often requires running the program under a debugger. So understanding these file headers helps in overcoming problems occurring during debugging. Okay, so portable executable file format is very old file format used in Windows. So all the EXTs and DLLs that are present on Windows, they all adhere to this format. Okay, so if you try to open these files even under Notepad, you will see that the same portable executable format is being used. Okay, so while doing malware analysis, the knowledge about portable executable format is a must. We need to be aware about this PE file format. Now, ELF is used on Linux, so it's not really that common because there are not many malwares on Linux platform. So that's why we'll be sticking to the PE file format. Now, what the portable executable is? So, portable executable format is a file format for executables, object code, and DLLs. So it is used in both 32 and 64-bit Windows OS. And portable refers to the format's versatility in numerous environments of OS. So this format, why it is essential because it tells the Windows OS loader to manage the wrapped executable code. So this includes your dynamic library reference for linking API export and import tables. So this format, this P file format, it also has provision for specifying what APIs are being exported or imported. Okay, resource management and thread local storage. So API export and import means what functions are being called by a binary. So if you simply try to statically analyze a binary, a malicious binary in a disassembler or a PE viewer, portable executable file format viewer, what you will see is that there will be certain APIs which will be used. So there will be certain functions which will be invoked by that particular binary. So those functions, they belong to some DLLs, some dynamic link libraries, some libraries. Okay. So those functions will be invoked when the executable runs. So the PE file format, you can specify that information. That API export and import tables, you can specify that. Okay, what functions are being imported and what functions are being exported. So that's how much useful this PE file format is. Now we come on to PE header structure. So I'll just like to there's a very good diagram we'll refer to in a short while. So PE header structure, it contains the MZ header or the DOS header. Now DOS header is just 2 bytes. Okay, so these are two magic number M and Z that tells us that this file format is a PE file format. There is a DOS stub which is just there for compatibility with DOS operating system. Then there is PE file header which contains your signature. Then there is image optional header. Now this image optional header contains important fields like subsystem and the entry point. So entry point is where your execution starts. So after a file is loaded in the memory by the operating system, it has to start somewhere, right? So the place where it starts, the place where the first instruction gets executed is your entry point. Then there is sections table. It tells us how to load the executable into memory. And then finally there are sections. So once the Windows OS loader has read the sections table, it has a good idea that how to load the sections in the memory. So the sections could be executable sections and data sections. Okay. Now the diagram that I was talking about is this. Yeah, so this is your diagram. So we have on the left is a dissected portable executable file, simple.exe. So the simple.exe has header and sections. So in header, there is DOS header, PE header, optional header, okay? And then there are data directories and section table. Now in sections, we have code, imports, and data. So in header, what happens is there is a DOS header. As I told you, the DOS header is always started by 2 characters M and Z, okay, which are also called the magic number. Then there is PE header, which contains one important field called the signature. Okay, so there is a constant signature. Then there is a machine information, which tells us what processor is used. Then there are number of sections. How many sections are there in the binary when it is loaded in memory. And there are some other fields as well. Then there is optional header. Okay, there is optional header. So optional header, what important field it contains? Address of entry point, as I told you, where execution starts. Then there is image base. So image base tells the Windows OS loader at what address the file should be mapped in memory. Base address that should be used when loading a file in memory. Then there is other fields. Okay. Then we come on to data directories. So in data directories, what is there? Pointers to extra structures. So there could be an import table and export table. So data directories contain that information. Okay. Then there is sections table. So sections table defines how the file is loaded in memory. As I told that Windows reads the section table to get an information about how to load the file in memory. So section table, there might be 3 or more sections, .text, .rdata, .data section. So each section is having a unique characteristic. So the text section is usually code execute read, and then there is data section, which is read write data. Then there is finally your code. So code contains your executable code, which is in machine language. So this code is finally executed by the CPU. Then there are imports. So imports is a link between the executable and Windows libraries. So as I told you earlier, right, that Windows OS loader that reads the import and export table to find out which APIs or which functions are being invoked by the binary. So the import structures. So in this figure, we are seeing that there are 2 DLLs, kernel32.dll and user32.dll. Each DLL is exporting an API. So first is exit process, and then there is message box. So it tells us that, okay, this binary is using these 2 APIs from these 2 libraries. Then there is finally data. So data contains your strings. So the loading process, what happens in loading process? First the headers are passed, then the section table is passed, then the file is mapped in memory. Okay, so file is mapped in memory according to the image based size of headers and sections table. Then the imports are passed. So imports, what happens in import table? The Windows OS tries to determine what all APIs are being called and from which library they are being called. And finally, the code is called at the entry point. So once the Windows OS transfers the execution to the entry point, the code simply executes and you are presented with the result. So in this case, we are seeing a message box, hello world. So we know that this file has been executed in memory. Okay, sections I told you about. Important are .code, .data section. So why to study P header? Okay, because it contains all the important necessary information required by the OS to execute the executable. Okay, so it might contain the libraries that the executable requires to be loaded. And it also tells us at what point the file is mapped in memory, at what point the file is loaded in memory, and also from where the execution begins. So what information interested in while analyzing the P header? We are interested in compiler timestamp, sections, libraries and imports, strings. Okay. So PEBR or PE Studio is a popular tool to analyze PE files. I'll just show you how to analyze a file using PEBR and PE Studio. So I have installed two tools, PEBR and PE Studio. Okay, just I think I'm getting a black screen. I'll just restart my VM. So as I was explaining to you that you need to have your own virtual machine prepared for performing analysis. So I have my malicious files on my desktop, and I also have all the tools installed in my Windows 7 virtual machine. So these virtual machines can be directly obtained from Microsoft. So Microsoft provides Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 10 virtual machines. So what you can do is you can simply download these VMs, and then you can perform your own analysis. So as I'm telling you, I have downloaded PEBear. This is PEBear, and this is PE Studio. Okay, so first I'll open the file in PEBear. So what file I'll be opening is just a sample file. I'll be opening this lab63.exe in PEBear. So here I've opened the file in PEBear. On the left, you are seeing all the DOS headers, DOS stub, NT headers. Okay, all the informations. Here we can see the disassembly of the file. Then some general information of the file, like checksum of the file and MD5 sum of the file. You are seeing the DOS header. DOS header, as I told you, always starts with a magic number 5A4D, which is MNZ. Okay. And there is rich header. The file header contains the machine information, sections count, number of symbols. Then there is your optional header. Optional header, as I told you, always has a entry point in it. So you can get an idea that at this particular relative address, this 128 is the relative address. So at this particular relative address, will the execution be started? Then there are some details about the import directory and export directory. Okay, so 0 means there is no export directory. Import directory 64F4. So it tells us that at relative address 64F4, will there be an import directory? Then there are section headers. So you are getting a nice visual representation. So on the left, you are seeing the raw sections, and on the right are the virtual sections. So raw section is when the file is present on disk. So this is how the file will appear. Virtual section means this is how the file will be loaded in memory. So you are seeing several sections are there, .text, .rdata, .data. So that's telling us that, okay, this will be the layout of the binary. Then there are finally imports. So imports are telling you what all DLS, what all APIs from which DLS are getting called. So in this, there is a very popular WinNet.dll, which contains the APIs which are used for performing network operations. For example, there is internet open URL, then internet read file. So this signifies us that, okay, maybe this binary is performing some network operations and it is using WinNet.dll to invoke its functions. Okay, so that was the demo of PEBear. Now I'll show you PE Studio. I'll open the same file in PE Studio. Now PE Studio is telling us some important, some more information. For example, it is telling us the indicators and it is telling us the VirusTotal score. So where VirusTotal score is, so VirusTotal basically is an online antivirus scanning service. So it contains a bunch of antiviruses. So when you submit a file to VirusTotal, it gets analyzed by all those antiviruses. So in this case, all 68 antiviruses have analyzed this file and have told us the results. So indicators. So indicators is telling us that, okay, this file references strings. This file is scored by VirusTotal. This file imports symbol. So these indicators are giving you a basic idea that, okay, maybe there is a chance that this file is malicious. Okay, it's telling us this file references a URL pattern. So just giving us a hint that to what extent the file could be malicious. Now the other sections are same as shown by PEBear. All your DOS stub, rich header, file header, optional header are there. You are also seeing the string, okay, this URL practicalmalwareaccess.com. So it is giving us a hint that, okay, maybe this URL is being visited and a file cc.htm is being downloaded from that URL. So that was a demo of PEBear and PE Studio. Now we come on to x86 architecture and assembly. So x86 architecture has registers, stack, CPU privilege modes. So all your malwares, they generally come under this x86 architecture. So when you try to disassemble a malware, then you'll see that x86 architecture is being used. It's a very common architecture. It's originally designed by Intel during 1978. It has complex instruction set computer type of instructions, and it has other features as well. So it is both it is used in all 62-bit, 32-bit, and 64-bit platforms. So here are the general registers from EAX till EBP. There are also segment registers, and the important register is EIP, which is instruction pointer register. It tells us, EIP tells us at what instruction is going to execute next. So these are the general purpose registers. Most common is stack pointer register, the second last register. It always points to the top of the stack. In 64-bit field, we have from RAX to R15. Okay, so these registers are used. So letter E in 32-bit, we have EAX, EBX, ECX. In 64-bit, we have RAX, RBX, and RCX, all the way to till R15. So these are the privilege protection levels. So the rootkits, as I was telling you, right, it was a type of malware which is very stealthy. It always executes in ring 0. And then in ring 3, your traditional malware executes. Now the common instruction in assembly language are push, pop, move, LEA, call, return. So whenever you try to call a function, then in the background, the call instruction is executed. Okay. Now this is your call stack. So in call stack, always we have on the left, there is the stack. The stack base is there and the stack top is there. Now don't get confused. The stack base is at the bottom and stack top is at the top. So stack base is at a higher memory address and stack top is at a lower memory address. On the right, we have a sample assembly listing of a program. So we have the push instruction and there is a call instruction. So call instruction is calling your sub function. Okay. And then there is finally leave and return instruction. So as soon as you push 0x00 and push 0xFF, they are pushed on the stack, and the stack pointer gets incremented. Now, whenever you try to call a function, call sub function, then what happens is a function will be called. Okay, so in that case, what happens? The address right after the call instruction gets pushed on the stack, gets pushed on the top of the stack, and then the function is called. Now, after the function has done its whatever it's supposed to do, the leave instruction is called, which just pops the arguments that were pushed on the stack earlier, like 0x00, 0xFF. Okay, and then return is called. So return, what happens is return address is popped off the stack. So return address always brings the CPU back to the place where it was before it executed the call instruction. So the instruction after the call instruction is executed next. Okay, so that was the call stack. Then the program layout in memory. So there is the program is layout in the following way. There is stack, heap, uninitialized data section, initialized data section, and program code. So this is a very common debugger in Linux called GDB, GNU debugger. So when you load a program under it, this is how it appears like. So at the very top we have the registers. Then the EIP is pointing to the instruction which will be executed next. Okay, so in this case, the EIP is pointing to 565561E6. Okay, so in the disassembly, you can see that that's where the EIP instruction is pointing to. Then there is your source code. Source code is only available for programs which have the debugging information enabled. Then there is stack. So in stack, as I told you, ESP always points to the top of the stack. Okay, so this is how a program looks in GDB. So this is a layout of the program in memory. So we have the proc maps. Okay, so you can see that how the program is being laid out. At the very top, we have the name of the program. In this case, the name of the program is add. Okay, so then we have your heap. Then, as I told you, right, each binary has APIs which are imported from libraries. So in this case, maybe this add function has some functions which are in libc.so. So libc.so is a very common library, libc. Okay, so this has all the common functions like printf, scanf, getters, putters. Okay, all your common instruction used in C programs, they are inside this library. So this library is also loaded in the memory. Then there is VDSO and then LD.so. Okay, so these VDSO and LD.so are always loaded with each program, generally loaded with each program that is in the memory. Then finally is your stack. So this is the layout of a 32-bit program in memory. Now we come on to packers and cryptors. So why would malware author want to use packer? Because they want to compress and encrypt the executables. Okay, they often protect the executable with packers to make it more difficult to analyze and to have the executable of smaller size. Now, the one feature of packed code is it is always unpacked in memory at runtime. So these are the common packers. UPX is there, VM Protect is there. Okay, this is your packer structure. So before packing, there is your PE header, section header, image section, and original file. Now, after packing, what happens is the image section is replaced by a packed section. Okay, and the entry point is changed. Earlier, the entry point was somewhere in the image section. Now, the entry point is in the unpacking section. Now, what happens is whenever the packed binary is run by the Windows OS, the code in the unpacking section gets executed first. Now, the job of the unpacking section is to take the packed section and unpack it in memory. So after unpacking, the packed section is replaced by the unpacked section. Why? Because unpacking section has done its job and it has converted the packed section to unpacked section. Okay, so this is the execution operation of a packed executable file. The functional components of a packer are encryption, encoding algorithm, decryption engine, and protection engine. So in protection engine, there is a code obfuscator, anti-debugger, anti-VM, anti-decompilation. So all these features are there. So these are common packers and cryptors. We have UPX, ASPAC, Armadillo, Thamida, and VM Protect. Now, before I show you the demo of UPX, I would just like to tell you that there are some online antiviruses as well. So we saw the validation step and reverse engineering, right? So in validation step, you can also take help of some online antiviruses, analysis tools, and sandboxes. So you can just submit your file to VirusTotal, and it will do its job and take your file and execute it under all the 64 or 68 antiviruses, and it will tell you the result. Okay. Then there is a Kaspersky Threat Intelligence Portal. Then there is also Cuckoo Sandbox, which is Cuckoo is an open source sandbox. So you can, if you don't want to submit the file for analysis on VirusTotal, you can simply run the file in a virtual machine in your setup in Cuckoo open source sandbox. Okay. Now I'll just show you the UPX demo. So I'll simply take a file. Let's say we want to compress lab6 to compressme.exe. So UPX have installed this tool using Chocolatey. So to use this tool, so I simply type UPX and then the name of the file that I want to compress. So in this case, it is lab6 to compress.exe. Now see the file before compressing, it is 40 KB. Okay, so the size is 40 KB. Now after compressing, what happens is the file size is reduced from 40960 to 16384 bytes. So there is a compression ratio of 40%. So it tells us that it has packed one file. Okay, so this is your UPX. Now, if you want to unpack the same file, you can also type UPX-D and then the name of the file. Okay. I would just like to show you that how the file behaves when it is packed. So I'll just open this lab6 to compressme.exe and we simply go to the imports. Now you see that their imports have been reduced. So now this win900.dll has only internet open and kernel32.dll has only 4 APIs. So that's what Packer does. It reduces the imports, okay, because it wants to reduce the size. Okay, so the imports are also reduced. Now if we unpack this file, we see that the file is also restored from 16 kilobytes to 40 kilobytes, and then we can open the same file under this PEBear, and then when we come on to imports and in win900.dll, we are seeing that now it has 5 APIs which are being imported. So you see that how Packer has reduced the APIs. Now after unpacking, we are able to see all the APIs. So this is how the Packer does its job. Now this UPX packer is very simple to pack and unpack because it is open source and the authors have kindly provided us with the mechanism to unpack the file. But in some commercial packers, what they do is the unpacking process is not so easy because they don't want other people to simply unpack their file. Okay, because that's their USP. Okay, the malware authors, they generally use those commercial packers to pack their files so that no one is able to unpack the file. Now, for unpacking such files, you need to have a good understanding of a debugger. You need to open the file under a debugger, and then you need to let the unpacking section do its job of unpacking the file in memory. After the unpacking has finished, what you do is you dump the file to disk, and after that, that's how you unpack the file in memory. Okay. Now, there are some good books to refer to if you want to get started with reverse engineering and malware analysis. First is Secrets of Reverse Engineering, and then there is Practical Malware Analysis. Okay, so let me know if you have any doubts. No doubts? Okay, then I'll just close the session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vivek.